What I'm about to tell you are two stories, both of things I can't explain, and I don't think I ever will know the answers to. Two things that truly have happened to me that were completely out of the ordinary. So, the first story takes place in one of the most cliche places any mysterious, strange story could. At midnight. I was walking home from my friend's house. The walk was about 20-30 minutes. It was a path it was a walk I was very familiar with, so I had no trouble walking back, and I was going to walk back past the lit roads, the main roads, so there wasn't much danger to me. I didn't want to bother my mum. It was really late, and my friends had had something to drink, and I told them that my mum was picking me up, so to be honest, it was the egg on my face, really, for lying about that. So I started down the street, past one of the non-main roads that I needed to go on to get to the main roads, and I was walking down a particular road, and right next to that road there was a path, the road, and then there was some woods. And as I was walking past that part, I could hear a noise coming from the foliage, the wooded section, the bushes and the trees. I could hear a noise, and it was just this rhythmic, like, it sounded like someone was walking amongst the leaves and the shrubbery. Bearing in mind this was midnight, there was no path on the other side, it was just the woods. So there was this walking. It didn't get closer, it didn't get further away, it was just this rhythmic walking sound on like leaves and shrubbery. I mean, my mind goes to the most dark places anyway when I can think of things that it could have been, so I didn't look at what it was. I didn't want to look at what it was, because my mind doesn't go to the scary thing it could be, like the ghost or the ghoul. My mind goes into being something physical, and I didn't want to look at it, whatever it was. So I'm not ashamed to admit, I ran the next bit. I ran for at least a minute until I got to a more lit area, and I was away from whatever it was. So I continued my journey, you know, that still being in my mind, the sound of the, because that sound, it didn't like last a second or two. It was a good 30 seconds as I was walking down this particular part of road. So I continue this walk, and I walk past this pub which is on this main road. There's no one really about. There are people in the pub you could hear. And then as I'm walking past the pub, there's like a bit of a side alley, and down that side alley I could hear this sound of tapping on brick. Again, I didn't look, but it was just this again. It was like it was in the same rhythm as the footsteps. This tapping, tap, tap, tapping. I didn't look, and when I was at a distance enough to turn around, and when I did turn around, there was no one down that alley, because you could see it from like down the road. There was no one down there, and at that distance, even if the noise was still going on, I couldn't hear it. So I carried on walking more, and I got to the end of my road. Now, at the end of my road, there is an old pub, an old abandoned pub. It got closed down because of X, Y, and Z, and they were gonna take it down or turn it into a curry shop, but the thing never happened. And long story short, it's just been left abandoned there. So as I'm passing this pub at the end of my road, very faintly, almost as if it was coming from within the pub, because there are a few smashed windows, so you can hear inside, like if something was happening inside. But again, from inside, just that. It sounded almost as if someone was like throwing rocks at a wall, but in that kind of pattern, that constant like tapping noise, as those 2 times had come before. Now, I'm not instantly calling for this being something sinister, and it could be purely coincidence, but you know, it was the setting of midnight, it was dark, there wasn't many people around. Well, there was no people around, just the cars every now and again. And just on those 3 occasions, I didn't see anything, I didn't look for anything, I just could hear a tapping of some kind. First it was the walking, then it sounded like someone was tapping on a brick, and then it sounded like someone was throwing stones, but all in the same like pattern of... So the next story is one that didn't happen that long ago actually. Near my house there are woods, and to get to work and to get back from work I walk through those woods, because when I go to work in the morning it is light, and when I come back it is also light, especially when I work an early shift. So a few months ago now, maybe this happened in January, I was on my way back from work. I was walking through this part of the woods, and then you got back onto the road for a second, and then you'd go back into the woods. So there was the woods, and there was a housing estate next to it, and then the woods the other side. So as I was walking down this particular strip of path in the woods, just before you got to this change onto the road, I could hear this calling. It was like a young voice, I'd say about the voice of a 10, 11, 12-year-old boy calling out. And at first, I didn't even register what the voice was saying, because I thought it was just 2 kids being loud, and I was like, I didn't really register what the words were saying, just that they were there. But then after it continued for a little bit of time, I tuned in and I listened, and the voice was calling out, "Help me." It wasn't a voice of fear. It wasn't the voice of someone in pain, but it was a voice of help me, help me, help me, help me. It was calling out. And when on like the 4th or 5th time, it was obviously saying help me. I started to, I don't know why I was running, but it was coming from somewhere ahead. Whether it was coming from the housing estate or the woods, it was coming from ahead of me. So I ran, and I got onto the road bit. And as I was about to enter the woods again, after the 12th or 13th time of this help me, just as I was about to get back into the woods, it stopped. Completely, the help me just stopped. The calling stopped, and it was quiet. I didn't know what to do at that point. I stood in the position I was for a good 2 minutes, just seeing if I could hear that voice again, and a guy drove past me on a bike, and we didn't even share a look. It didn't seem like he had heard the same sound as me, so maybe he didn't. I was convinced it was coming from the woods. It could have been coming from the housing estate, I don't know, because it wasn't coming from any particular direction. So I went and looked around the surrounding woods. I mean, I was looking down into like crevices and into the lake, into the little river that ran through it. I was picturing seeing a kid that was like hanging or something, but I didn't really feel scared. The voice wasn't that of fear. The voice wasn't in terror or anything like that. But it was just calling out for me. It was calling out for someone to help it. I was expecting the next day to hear something in the news that a boy had gone missing, and I would have to come forward about it and be like, well, this is what I heard, but it has been 2 months now, and I haven't heard anything in relation to it. I've walked through that wood again, and I've heard nothing since. I don't feel fear when I walk through that wood. It's just something completely unexplained, and something I will probably never ever figure out the cause of. That voice that said help me.